All right, welcome back to another week of Secret Stash. This is a fun one. This is a coffee from my friends at Driftaway coming out of Brooklyn, New York. And this is the India Ratnagiri 72-hour SCOBY anaerobic processed coffee. It is very insane, and it comes from Ratnagiri estate, and it's, in my opinion, a coffee farm that is at the forefront, especially in India, of coffee processing. So this specific coffee is a inoculated yeast process coffee that it's kind of like kombucha, where they have yeast, SCOBY, inside with the cherries and then it's fermented for, I believe, 72 hours, which is why it's called 72 hours. So it is pretty wild. Basically, what you're going to be tasting is you're going to be tasting a lot of layering of processing. What's interesting too is this is a Katwai. So this is a perfect example of how processing can elevate coffee. So this is also a coffee grown at 1350, 1300-ish meters above sea level, which is on the lower end. And what is interesting is when you taste this coffee, you will be very blown away. For you guys who like wash coffees, I'm not sure if this is going to be up your alley, but this is a great example of how far processing in India has come. We've featured fairly clean Indian naturals before. We've featured some of those types of coffees in the past, but this is kind of at the extreme end, where if you're into some of the advanced processing coffees that come out of Colombia, this is exactly like that, but in India. And I think that is what is really fascinating. When you taste this coffee, you'll be very just surprised, in my opinion. This was my first reaction a few months ago when I first tasted this coffee. Is I was like, whoa, this is an Indian coffee. What is happening here? But this is a very lightly roasted coffee. I feel like this is a coffee that you can roast very light, and it's also a great example of the green coffee being able to hold up. So it's like, this is well-processed coffee, and it can hold up to being pushed in a variety of ways. Roast level on this coffee is on the lighter end. I would recommend you rest this for at least a month. We are brewing this about, I think, 2 weeks off roast, which I think we'll start to see things open up, but for sure, let this coffee rest. And if you smell the coffee, I get a lot of rose. So this is like, rose water is a flavor note on here. Lavender is also a flavor note on here. You will smell that in the coffee, and I also think you'll taste it in the cup. That's what is very impressive. Recipe for this coffee I have is actually pretty aggressive. It's a recipe that I would use for a lot of wash coffees, because I think the roast level of this coffee is very light, and you do want to actually push this coffee a bit. But I would recommend, if it's a little too funky for you, tone it down a little by lowering some of the temperature, maybe coarsen up the grind size a little. But I'm brewing this 1:16, grind size 55. Yeah, it's a good one. What you're smelling, at least what I smell, is I get a ton of this lavender, and then you smell layering. You're smelling yeast processing. Kombucha is SCOBY. That's like how this coffee is processed. And then you smell some of the Katwai, and I would say Indian terroir, which does have a little bit of earthiness at the back, but also that could be Katwai. I have a very long bloom for this coffee. So if you've brewed other coffees from us, like Say and some of the lighter wash coffees, I think this is a coffee that does benefit from that style of brewing. I picked this coffee mainly because it is just a fantastic example of how far these producers and farms and processing has come, especially in India, where it's like, that is confusing. This will confuse a lot of you guys if you've never tasted a coffee of this caliber from India. But your whole room is just like crazy here. It's like if you've ever had coffees from like your Diego Bermudez's, your Wilton Benitez's, where they take Castillo, they take these quote unquote more typical varietals and throw it in processing. This is like that, but it's in India, and I think that's cool. And I'm also brewing this coffee at 1:16 ratio. I have found this coffee to be very interesting in 1:17, but it depends on what type of flavor profile you're looking for. In the 1:16 world, I think it's super upfront, punchy acidity, loud processing. 1:17, it's a little more defined. You're getting a bit more layering of processing. Personally, I want louder acidity, so 1:16 is what I went with for this coffee, but feel free to experiment. Wraps up about 3:30. Anything above 3 minutes on this coffee seems to be pretty good. So let's go ahead and give this a taste. Rosewater, lavender. But the fun thing about this coffee is like it's everything you smell when it's brewing is pretty much what you'll get in the cup. Rose water, processing, lavender, a lot is happening here. And this really will remind you of a lot of those more advanced processed Colombian coffees. But you have to think about this again, it's from India. And I think that's what's super cool. When it's hot. Wow. Okay, a lot's happening here. It's a very sweet, sweetness forward cup, but it's sweetness from processing. Round, floral, well, more like rose and lavender, very sweet. And then at the back is where I get acidity, at least when it's hot. So it's like sweetness, then processing. And what I'm tasting in terms of processes is I'm tasting a lot of rose and lavender. And then at the end, I get a little maybe darker stone fruit acidity. Apricot and cherry type of acidity is what I would say you get out of this coffee, especially when it starts to cool. I think what is impressive about this coffee is when you let it cool down. So when these coffees, some of these, newer varietals or newer regions or newer processing methods and so on and so forth, generally speaking, what you can do is you can brew the coffee, let it sit until it gets just to above room temperature, and then taste. That is where you'll find, I would say, the most transparent presentation of the coffee. You'll be able to essentially see like, okay, is the processing falling apart? Is the varietal falling apart? Is the roast falling apart? Like what is happening here? What's impressive, most impressive to me is things are actually really well tied together when this coffee is cooled down. So when it's cooled down, let's give this a taste. Processing is there, it's very sweet, and then this acidity now up here, and it's actually really well interlinked. It's tied together. Usually you would taste like, okay, this is something falling apart, something is going weird. Really well tied together, especially for considering, you got to think about the specs of this coffee, right? Like, okay, this is a anaerobic, crazy processed coffee from India. It's Katwai, it's got a lot of things working against it, right? But this is just an example of like well processing, good processing, good roasting. Hopefully a good brew if you liked my brew of this coffee. And I think that's what's really, really nice about this. Give this another taste. I would say it's not as sweet as it was when it was hot. Now we're getting more of that acidity, that like cherry, apricot acidity. So it's like layering of processing rose water and lavender. Then we get this cherry acidity that's tied together, and then it's like a nice round sweet finish. I will say, though, that as it's very, very cool, you are tasting some of the Katwai, and you're tasting what Indian coffee tastes like, the Indian terroir, which does have some like earthiness attributes to it, but it's like very minimal. And honestly, I feel like it's better that it's still there because this is still Indian coffee, right? It's like this is not exactly trying to say like, okay, we're gonna get rid of every single thing that makes Indian coffee. It's still in there, but it's elevated through this level of processing, which I think is very impressive. Especially, I'm just sipping on this. Very impressive coffee. Even if you're a washed coffee enjoyer, this is like how far other regions have come. And I think, it's good to see and taste and experience what's happening. But this, in my opinion, is going to probably be one of your most impressive experiences with Indian coffee this year. This is like the new. Processing is getting a lot better in a lot of these different regions, but I think India, especially Ratnagiri estate, has really pushed very, very far on the advanced processing world. And if you've never tasted a coffee like this, this will be a very mind-blowing experience. It is a fantastic tasting coffee roasted by Driftaway. But yeah, tons of rose water, lavender, really nice acidity, sweet. Like so much is happening in this coffee, and you have to think about it. It's like this is a Katwai from India. What is happening? So yeah. Very, very, very fun. But yeah, that's all I wanted to share today. We have a lot more coffees that we are releasing all the time now. But this is a special one, and I wanted to shout out Driftaway for working with us to get this coffee, and also shout out Ratnagiri Estate for producing this coffee. Mr. Padres doing amazing work, and I hope you guys enjoy this coffee. It's a fun one. So thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch this video. If you have any questions, feel free to email me, but otherwise I'll see you guys in the next one.